We want to discuss the UK-EU reset deal next. Some sections of Scotland's fishing industry have accused Sir Keir Starmer's government of capitulating to the EU over this deal on access to UK waters. Labour ministers agreed a 12-year deal which extends existing access for EU boats in exchange for reduced checks and restrictions on food exports. The agreement's been described as disastrous by the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes said it was a great betrayal of our fishing fleet. But fish farming body Salmon Scotland welcomed the deal, saying it slashes red tape, which will allow Scottish products and people easier access to the EU. In 2023, the UK exported £1.2 billion worth of fish to the EU, which is around 70% of all fish exports. So on this, Andy, I think with EU-UK relations at the centre of this, fisheries policy has got two key arrangements. So it's access to each other's waters and then quota shares, i.e. how the total allowable catch of fish is actually then shared out. Does Scotland win or lose in these areas as part of this reset, or is the picture a little bit more complex than a binary win and loss?
I think it's more complex as a whole than that. I think what is always the case is that the Scottish fishing industry, in isolation, always loses from negotiations with the EU, and it always has. That's unfortunately because of the fact that economically there are bigger issues at play as far as the government is concerned. As far as this Labour government is concerned, there are bigger issues at play. As far as previous Conservative governments are concerned, there are bigger issues at play, and there are bigger trade wins. And the reality of it, I don't particularly like it, and I'm sure a lot of listeners won't like it either, but the harsh reality of it is that economically, Scottish fishing industry is worth sacrificing. And they do. That's what they do. But this gets back, I think, to what I said earlier on about the setup. This is just too easy for Labour to be pilloried on and for the SNP to score a political victory. I mean, another disaster for Anas Sarwar who gets thrown under the bus by something that Labour does. Why don't we have a situation in the sort of federal structure that was mentioned earlier on? Why don't we have a situation where Angus Robertson, instead of making a speech at Holyrood yesterday about all the things that went wrong and all the UK government phone calls that got cancelled, why is Angus Robertson not in the room? Why is he not part of the negotiating team on behalf of particular Scottish interests? I'd be very comfortable with that. Not just him, but people in Northern Ireland, people in Wales. Why don't we have a pan-UK negotiating team so that interests like the Scottish fishing industry that are particular to one part of the country don't get squeezed, and therefore you don't get this situation where a devolved government is able to come out and score another pretty big political victory on the back of something that the Westminster government has done. I'm afraid it's just another example of where the unionist parties just make life very difficult for themselves because of the setup.
Jeff, John Swinney posted on X, Scotland's fishing industry has been undermined by the UK government again. Like the Tories, Labour didn't even consult the Scottish government and treated our fishing communities as expendable. Only independents would give us the seat at the EU table to defend Scotland's interests. Do you want to talk to us about some of the language there that John Swinney's used?
Well, we know why you're asking this question, because I asked you, did you understand the reference to expendable, the word expendable? And you said, no, I didn't. Well, let me give you a little bit of history here. So I started working for Alex Salmond as an intern in 2004-05. And one of the first things I was asked to do by the office manager, great guy, Councillor Stephen Smith, is we were aware that this memo existed, and it was a memo at the time that was being prepared for the Heath government and actually for his office, as about the accession to the European Economic Community, the forebear to the EU at the time, to the common market essentially. And we knew under the 30-year rule that this document was going to be released. And in it, it said that in terms of the wider EU context, in terms of joining the European Union, or what would become known as the European Union, the fishing industry could be regarded as quote-unquote expendable. Now, we had to look through a bunch of documents at the time to locate that. We located it quite quickly, actually. I remember Stephen Smith thought it would be like a week in London looking through the National Archives for it. We weren't. We actually found it in a few hours, amazingly. And by the time I flew back up to Aberdeen, there was a story from Sean Connery saying how disgraceful it was that he'd received this memo from Alex Salmond and that the Scottish fishing industry was being treated as expendable. And then I realised just how quickly and how strategic Alex Salmond worked. You needed to elevate something. Why don't you get James Bond to tell the story? So, look, the serious point is already been made by Andy McKeever. The lack of contact, the lack of this dialogue with the Scottish government, it's an easy win, it's an easy hit. So the SNP are in a position they can say, well, we like bits of it and we understand the need to try and have greater relations with the EU, but once again, no consultation, not even treated with any degree of respect, given that fishing is largely devolved, and you've sold our fishermen down the river, and now communities up and down the coast will be very, very alarmed at this. And it's worth just pointing out from a regional perspective that Peterhead is the largest fish port in Europe. And we've had a conversation about energy profits levy just now and oil and gas job losses in the northeast. We have not had any advance on Acorn of any significance in terms of the carbon capture project. This region's taken a bit of a hit just now. And I don't want to repeat all the stuff I said last week, but it is pretty heartbreaking and alarming right now. And so I really do hope both governments are thinking long and hard about how they can support this region. It's not necessarily needing public money, as we keep saying. We don't need a British Steel nationalisation. We just need taxes, unfair taxes taken off. We just need a little bit of a punt, yes, some money towards Acorn, which is a nascent technology. But it does feel a little bit that we're getting hit and hit over and over again right now. I have to say that. And I do feel for the fishermen and the industry that's been affected by this.
And that's the thing, because there's the big economic picture, which, as we're kind of nudging at, fishing is seen as such a small part of. But actually, when you zoom in, the impact of these sorts of decisions on local communities is absolutely huge. Andy, did you want to come back in there?
Just in Shetland, I hope Andy was going to say something about Shetland as well. Shetland's a massive player in this regard as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say. There's more fish landed in Shetland than in England, Wales and Northern Ireland combined.
Wow.
So there are pockets of real difficulty here as a result of, deals with the EU over many years. But again, this is where I come back to the ability to just shoot themselves in the foot. Labour could, in a different world, have presented this as having been a good day for Scotland.
But it was welcomed by some. Is the other
yeah,
thing,
of course
Andy.
it was,
So
and
even
absolutely.
within fishing,
And you mentioned salmon Scotland, because from an export point of view, from a point of view of getting food out to the EU, and France is one of the biggest destinations for Scottish salmon, which is a critically important industry in these very. I just talked about Shetland. Big salmon farming area as well. So this is good news for them on that hand. It's not all bad news. And I suppose this is the point of it, is that there's a little bit of one hand and a little bit of the other. But the difficulty is, from a PR point of view, it's all been the negative. In a country that voted pretty significantly to stay in the EU, this could in another world have been presented as having been a pretty good deal and a pretty good day. And if they had just integrated the Scottish Government a little bit more into what they were doing, and frankly given the Scottish Government a little bit less leeway to beat them over the head after the fact, then this could all have been presented relatively differently, and indeed maybe the deal for our fishing communities might have been a little bit different in the grand scheme of things as well. I think it's unfortunately just another example of them just not going about things in a politically or economically particularly astute way.
Yeah, look, and you're right, actually, Callum. It's a good challenge because I am supportive of efforts to try and realign where we can around a greater relationship with the European Union. There's no doubt that this is a very early step. It's not transformational by any stretch, and I wouldn't be selling it as such if I was Labour, frankly, because there's not going to be material difference anyway for the long term. There might be, but not in the short and medium term. So I do, let's be fair here. Let's play that. But I mean, I don't want to repeat Andy's points, but the politics of this have not been played particularly well, and you are left going, just how influential is Scottish Labour in all of this? And I think that has to be reflected on it if they're going to make any sort of fist of the next election in 2026. Final point on this though. Do not underestimate reform in some of these fishing communities. And whether we agree with it or not, the point is that they kind of feel that they've been kind of shafted consecutively, some of the fishing communities. And I wouldn't be surprised if Nigel Farage makes a trip to the northeast pretty soon to make this very, very point. Would it be fair of him to do so, but perhaps not, and there would be questions around how he would have done it better in terms of his Brexit deal. We still don't know what the detail of that is, but he will see an opportunity in this. You mark my words, and he will make fishing part of that, particularly in Scotland when he visits here.